YU to study Chassidus. I don't think that there's another case like that to my knowledge, maybe in more recent years. I was in there, so I came to study and do a master's in Revel with Dr. Yaakov Elman, and my master's thesis was comparing the thought of Rabbi Nachman and Tzaddik. And I first got introduced to Rabbi Tzaddik through a figure in my neighborhood, Ari Bergman, who first introduced the thought of Rabbi Tzaddik to me, and I eventually went on to continue his thought in Shalom Viv and in Ner Yisro. And I went to go to YU really to study Chassidus. People always ask me why somebody would get a master's in Chassidic thought, and I always tell them it's for the money. A lot of money in that industry. So I'm killing it right now. If you want any advice, just come to me afterwards. My phone rings off the hook with investment firms, nonstop. We need a master's in Chassidic. But to kick it off, I wanted to ask each panelist, how did you first get introduced to Chassidic thought? And we'll start all the way on.
So that was what first perked my interest, and then the presence of Hasidim in Rockland County, where my family had moved when I was 12 years old, that whetted my appetite. And my next step was to actually visit Hasidic communities, one of which was Nusware, and that sort of became my measuring rod for Hasidic experience, and I think secondarily Hasidic thought, so that I came from Hasidic thought to Hasidic experience, and then later on began to explore various Seforim. But I would have to say again that my first impressions were formed by these two sources. There was one more as a Reform rabbi, Newman, with the Bashevkin books, had a volume called the Hasidic Anthology, very thorough likut of Hasidic Seforim. So those you visited Obama Street.
Right, Babbage, Bell's, a few other places. Israel Cook, I could, yes, he did, that's right. It's also, we instruct the panelists not to speak numbers. So, but my family on my father's side is right? Is a very staunch literature family. On my mother's side, it was a very staunch literature family. And we have I share a great aunt, a great uncle, together with Rabbi Reichman from Tel's side of the family. And in fact, then the family became a very prominent Lubavitcher family. My mother's name was Shochet, and the Shochet family was a very prominent Lubavitch family. And so that always intrigued me from an early age as to what exactly happened there, go from classic literature to Chassidus. But besides that, in Seforim, my introduction to Chassidus was the Org Dayol. Org Dayol, Dario Shor's Sefer, which came out in 19. And from there I expanded. And then when I was in Brooklyn, I learned through my route on Megillas Esther. And then I complained to Rabbi Nachum Lansky in Baltimore, who was one of my introductions to Chassidus, and very, very big tzaddik, that it was a bit too dry. And he said to me, "We're Reb Tzaddik, you'll enjoy it more." And from then, I haven't looked back. Reb Tzaddik is an amazing, amazing resource. How it's whether that's real Chassidus is something we'll have to talk about in the course of the evening.
So my introduction to Hasidic thought was through Moshe. When I was, 15 or so, we were once at the Kotel Ma'aravi for the Chakras. My father was davening the Amud. It was a very slow davening, and at the end of the davening, there were these two Hasidic individuals who came over to give my father Yasher Koach. One was Rabbi Segula, the Menahel of Torvadas, and the other was Rav Wolfson, the Mashgiach of Torvadas. And Rav Wolfson said this was the only minyan I could keep up with, because Rav Wolfson loves to daven very slowly. In that experience, my father invited Rav Wolfson to come to the Yeshiva Hesder of Shiloh and to give a shmooze to the Bachrin in the Yeshiva Hesder. Wolfson came and spoke about Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is really the Yom Tov Shlomo Melech. And Shlomo Melech is the Gilgul of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. It was a lot of things that I'd never heard before. And from that first introduction, a relationship began with Rav Wolfson, with his family, his son-in-law, Rav Machal Zilber, his Tichinah Rebbe. And so several years later, I was in Rav Wolfson's shul for Chassidus. It was in the dark, a lot of singing. Went the 2 hours after Shabbos ended, and after the davening of Ma'ariv, I asked Rav Wolfson if he would teach a group of us from YU Hasidic thought. So Rav Wolfson's response was, he didn't have any time. He said, if you want to learn Hasidic thought, he would recommend the Seforim of Tzaddik, Sfas Emes, and Tanya. So I said to Rav Wolfson, I've tried to learn Sfas Emes, but I haven't been able to understand any of it because he assumes a lot of knowledge that I don't have. So Rav Wolfson said, keep trying. And he said, but really, if you really want to become a chassid, he said, you don't need to learn Chassidish Seforim. You need to learn a lot of Gemara, the master in your learning, do a lot of chesed, daven with a lot of kavanah. I always have a place right over here. For about 3 years, there was a group of us from YU go down to Borough Park to learn with Rav Wolfson in his apartment, Tanya. That was my entree into Hasidus.
So Chassidus certainly seems to have gotten quite a bit more attention, particularly in the modern Orthodox community. I was wondering if you could speak for a moment about whether or not you think this is a positive or negative development. And I want to append to this question another thought, that from within this community, in what ways do you think the modern Orthodox community most misunderstands the world of Chassidus? I'll start from Rabbi Schiller once again to kick it off.
So you're going out of order with questions.
Just to keep everybody on their toes.
In many ways, modern Orthodoxy, or better stated, I would say, certain segments of the religious Zionist community in Eretz Yisrael have become the community that experiences Hasidic Seforim and thought in a renewed, fresh way, perhaps in ways that the more established Hasidic communities that have been around for 200 plus years do not any longer experience that way, with quite that freshness, quite that Flishkeit. So if you mean in your question those segments of religious Zionism in Eretz Yisrael that have really taken to Chassidus over the past 20, 30, 40 years, then certainly it's been a very positive development in those circles. In terms of America, I think that by and large it's been very positive, but it's been positive in those segments of the community which already have a grounding in essential Torah mitzvahs. When it's sort of sprinkled where there is not yet this basic grounding, I find that it can be either flippant or antinomian at times. But by that I mean to say that just jumping and hopping and bopping and just ruach and things like this, which do not have a grounding in Torah and Yerushalayim and Halacha, can be meaningless at best. So I think we have to be very careful that there has to be a degree of a layer of a serious understanding of and commitment to Torah mitzvahs in order for the well springs of Chassidus to make the ground more fertile and to have spiritual growth. Occasionally, there is the other side of the coin, which sometimes you may find a person who simply cannot respond to what he might perceive mistakenly as the dry structure of halacha and Torah, and occasionally that person can be awakened by Hasidic thought. But I think by and large it takes place, as I say, serious religious Zionist circles or the more serious Torah-oriented non-Orthodox circles. And conceivably, I once said to someone that Hasidic movement is 250 years old, that's a long time for a movement to stay around and be fresh. The phrase routinization of charisma comes to mind, that after a certain period in which you have a revolutionary Renaissance movement, it then becomes the establishment. So in some sense, perhaps the Chadal or the Chabakuk elements in Eretz Yisrael, they don't have that 250-year period of institutionalization, and that perhaps to some extent the movement will continue among them.
I don't like the term modern Orthodox, so I'm going to respond to this just in terms of general population. But first I want to mention that the last time the MTA went to visit Rabbi Lamb, the senior class, Rabbi Schiller was there as well. Rabbi Lamb said to me, I don't know if you remember hearing this, he said, every high school should teach Reb Tzadok.
Who said that?
Rabbi Lamb. Do you recall that? He said that. I asked, because he mentioned Reb Tzadok in his presentation, how he learned Reb Tzadok, which took me by surprise. And then he said every high school should learn Reb Tzadok. I'm not sure exactly how high schools would learn Reb Tzadok. Probably beginning to because it's would work. But in any event, that was from the head of modern Orthodoxy. So, in my modern Orthodox experience, so there's somebody here tonight, one of the people who was one of my Talmidim, and one of the high points of my chinuch career was when he and another person who's not here tonight got into a fist fight in Shir over Chassidus versus Misnagdus. I asked both of them today whether they remember the exact Nekuda Avodas Hashem over which the fistfight took place, and they don't exactly remember, but that was very, very beautiful to see that people actually cared about something in school which was meaningful in terms of Avodas Hashem. So obviously the notions of Chassidus have the capacity to turn people onto Yadus in a way which is very profound and even emotional. On the other hand, we should not deceive ourselves, as Rabbi Schiller will tell you later, to think that we outside of the Hasidic community are experiencing authentic Chassidus. The Seforim we learn, for the most part, they don't learn the Hasidic yeshivas. The Piyas Hetzner, the Siva Shalom, I guess they learn the Seforim, but or Gavriel, Seforim like that certainly, they don't learn the Sfasemis or Tzaddik, Sfasemis maybe here, are not learned the Hasidic yeshivas. Mori Naim, I think, is the sefer which is the most popular Hasidic yeshivas, which I have not actually even learned. I have one of my roles is one of my professional positions is that I go out to yeshivas as part of an accreditation process to monitor them. And I went once to one of the yeshivas I go to, I won't mention the name. I asked them in Yiddish because their English was not so good, and my Yiddish was not so good, but to work it out, I asked them, "Was meint das zu sein a Chasidische Bacher?" What does it mean to be a Chasidische Bacher? And this is the answer which I received. And I think these answers are good answers. I should confirm with you that they're good answers. And they are things which actually do have an impact, I think, on any community which does approach Chassidus, even in the more intellectual way that we approach Chassidus. The first answer was to Milvato sich zu Rebbe. To Milvato oneself to the Rebbe. Now I want to tell you, I went to another Chassidish yeshiva, top-notch one. I'm sure it's on the board of the yeshiva I'm about to mention. Again, the other yeshiva, they said Bittul to Rebbe. So they said, no, versteht sich Bittul to Rebbe, Bittul to Rebbe. So they said too late. Then a chassid tut lifnim yishur sadeh, very much into adding Gedorim into Kedusha, which is answer which we get into later on. Essen und schlofen l'shem shamayim, l'chol d'rachecha da'eir. To eat and drink l'shem shamayim, which is part of l'chol d'rachecha da'eir, to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu in everything you do. Yet a mitzvah, mer b'simcha, mer b'cheshek. Each mitzvah to do with more simcha and more cheshek, more desire. Starke ishtoikus for avodas Hashem. Strong yearning for avodas Hashem. And finally, hanhabas, mikveh, levush. One goes to mikveh every morning, one wears Hasidic levush. So I think actually in everything except the last aspect, there have been positive influences in the general world, which has adopted Hasidus, which have extended to us. I don't know mikveh and levush are necessarily or not necessarily to be true Hasid. Probably they are. But the other influences I think have had permeated our community and have certainly affected us positively.
So I think it's been a very positive addition to the community, certainly in terms of increasing passion for the Ribono Shel Olam, for Avodas Hashem. I think Shemesh. And these individuals have tremendous passion. They're also characterized, for the most part, as being very, very broad-minded. So, quote from both Lubavitch, Breslov, the Russian Hasidim, the Ukrainian Hasidim, the Polish Hasidim, Svasemes, and others. And I think that their ideas are studied in Hasidic circles, maybe not in the established Hasidic yeshivas, but amongst their followers, they're certainly studied, and they're studied as well in our circles. I think that one of the challenges for our community in terms of Chassidus is that sometimes our community tries to put its own values project them into the Hasidic framework, and that's not necessarily the case. So, when we hear things like Bechhofer, bringing the Jewish people back to Eretz Yisrael, the soldiers being Moser Nefesh to save Jewish lives, and I think it's quite a shock to discover that in mainstream Hasidic circles, they don't view it that way at all. They're very influenced by, say, the Satmar Rebbe, quite critical of the state of Israel, and certainly critical of Jews carrying weapons and fighting against non-Jews.
We're gonna continue with Rabbi Reichman. Are there any Hasidic ideas that you feel do not get enough attention? Are there any ideas in Hasidus that you think get too much attention?
Within our community or in general?
Feel free. I speak with a purposeful ambiguity, so feel free to read into it however you.
I think within our community, I'm not sure if the emphasis on Kedusha and Shmiras Einayim gets as much attention as it should in the Hasidic community. I think in the Hasidic community it's a very big emphasis. And for us, it's harder to try to live up to those types of standards that the Hasidim are trying to live at. So I think that's one area that certainly we can do more of in terms of Gidrei Kedusha and getting better in that area.
We're gonna go.
On this one,
At the core, even though I love Chassidus, I remain a Litvak, and Chassidus does not speak to me, and this thing will find up a little bit on what Rabbi Reichman said, in terms of its idealism. But it's hard to find the sense of idealism which one finds in the Bali Musar in the Hasidic Seforim. It's possible, but it's not as easy. And I mean by Musar Seforim, I don't mean just any Musar Seforim, as many people here know. My role model, my great Moderator is Rabbi Zev Reichman, and you don't find Rabbi Zev Reichman-esque writings in Chassidus. And Rabbi Zev Reichman addressed issues, of profound issues, of not just the Yisro but also of Zionism and poetry, a very eclectic and wonderful spirit which really speaks to me much more. Having said that, but in Derech HaLimud, I think we can gain a tremendous amount by Chassidus. When I say Derech HaLimud, I mean our Limud of Agadata. There's one profound Tzaddik I'd like to share, which is an example of something which is, to me, was unbelievable. And which is, there's a famous medrash, which you're all familiar with, which says that Paro had 3 Yotzim, which were Yisro, Eov, and Bilam. And Bilam said that they should be Meshabed the Jews. They should make them serve as slaves. And then enslaved the Jews. And Eov was quiet. Bilam was punished, and Eov suffered Yisurim. He suffered affliction as a result. So the Tzaddik asked the obvious question, which is Chazal saying that Bilam wasn't born. Bilam died at the age of 34, the 40th year of the sojourn in the desert, which time it's Mitzrayim, let alone the time of the enslavement. So how is Bilam the Yoetz of power? So the Tzaddik says that prototypes of Eov are 3 parts of the psyche of power. They're not individuals, they're real people. but a Chazal, and when you learn Chazal, Maral does it a little bit, but the Tzaddik even more. When you learn Chazal, from that perspective, it is extraordinarily eye-opening. You can understand things in a much more profound way, which you normally don't get, especially because the Litvish yeshivas were trained to gloss over the Agadita as much as possible.
Right, that do not get enough attention. I think two of the most popular works that have come from the Hasidic world in recent years that are Orthodox and religious Zionist circles are those of Rabbi Yaakov Mena Shechter of Breslov, and of course the late Slonim Medeb and the Sibur Shalom. And I think both of them conjure up a theme which is very important for all of us, and that is the complaint which we often hear from people that I am not turned on to whatever aspect of the Avodas Hashem, davening, learning, Shabbos, Yom, whatever it is. It's just the fact I'm not turned on, as if we sit back and await some that these two things can provide us with those passions which we yearn for and sometimes say we've not yet realized. So the idea that Yisro or whatever term we want to give to the koch of Avodas Hashem, that this is something we ourselves can create within ourselves. And any ideas that are emphasized too much, well, once again, we'd have to differentiate between sort of our community, the Wayuk type community, and the Hasidic community. I think if anything is emphasized too much in the Wayuk type community, I'm going to repeat myself again, it is an easy, flippant notion that one can jump and dance and prance and sing and ruach, and there's these vague, easy cliches, and to somehow think this is connected with the Avodas Hashem B'chalal and Avodas Chassidus B'frat. I'll never forget, many years ago, it goes back to 1981, Ramaz Haki team, they had come back from a certain seminar, and I remember they were chanting 1, 2, 3, Ruach, 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 and I thought, how absurd and sad this really is. And that's the kind of thing where they were good guys, don't get me wrong, but they had this sort of vague sense of what spirit meant. That spirit was some kind of I don't know, fraternity party of some sort. But of course, it's much more serious than that. So a tendency to accentuate in a superficial and flippant way things that some think are Chassidus. And in terms of the Hasidic community itself, we have to differentiate, I think, between any society. There's sort of a bottom level, there's a broad middle, and there's the top, so the spiritual bell curve of any Jewish community. And I think that as far as the middle of the Hasidic community, there is a sense that if one maintains the counter-revolutionary aspects of Chassidus, the shunning of modernism and Goyishkeit, and era, that the counter-revolutionary and the seguliistic aspects of Chassidus are part of the historical package, and whether they can be separated from the main body of Chassidus, perhaps we can talk about later on. But certainly they are not what the Baal Shem and the Maggid and Talmidei HaMaggid really wanted from us, but they wanted something far more profound and far more awake with Getlokai. So that would be, I think, the misunderstanding that the older established Chassidus have, that they think that the rejection of modernism and Minhagim is what Baal Shem wanted.
So maybe we'll dive a little bit further into some of the concepts that you were just alluding to. And we'll just ask a blanket question of, can Hasidic thought and Hasidic practice be separated from one another? We're going to start with Rabbi Bechhofer.
Like Rodesta writes in his Divine Niftamil, he says, today, once upon a time, there were Hasidim which had their own Darkei Avodah, and the Smadim which had their own Darkei Avodah. It's a story from the Saba Rebbe, I should say, before I go on, which is that I wrote an essay once on Chassidus, which you can find online, Forks in the Road, about Chassidus versus the Smadim, which I wanted to publish, and the Jewish Observer, though the Metzger said he can't publish it because it needs to be a book, not an article, and he never made it into a book, but I thought it was a good article. And the beginning of both the Sabbath Rebbe was supposed to have said, some Rebbe was supposed to have said that once upon a time there was a man who only ate fish. And his son-in-law married a family, only ate milk. So they couldn't eat together, so they had two separate kitchens, two separate dining rooms, and the wife would make for her husband this meal and for her son-in-law that meal. Eventually they became poor, they couldn't afford anymore. So everybody was eating potatoes. But they were still eating the potatoes in the Malaysian side and the potatoes in the Milchik side. Until finally they realized, you know what, we're all eating potatoes anyway, we might as well get together. So the Sabbath was supposed to have said that he was, the Prisker Rav was the last true Misnageh, and that he himself was the last true Chassid. And since then, everything is eclectic, both by erosion but also as an advantage. And that's what the Bechhofer says. He says in our day and age, whatever we can take from the Mechazik Avodas Hashem, we don't have to be doctrinaire about it. We shouldn't be doctrinaire about it. Whatever, everybody has different things which speak to them across the different the array of choices, and it's important to choose those things.
What is the Chiddush of Chassidus? One can ask a lot of the basic ideas of the Shem Tov, Magid, Tanya for sure, are already in the writings of the Ari, in the writings of Reb Chaim Vital. What's the Chiddush of Chassidus? The king passed away, they need a new king. So they hear that there's the right person in a certain place. So those who are connected to the news and hear all the information, they're already at peace. But a lot of others are not at peace yet. And so they said, we'll send a shliach who goes see the person. The shliach goes, comes back with great reports, and more people now are at ease. That the Zohar is sort of to be aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but for the Dolim to grasp it. The Ari HaKadosh is sort of the shliach who was sent out and comes back with a positive report. And the nature of what the Baal Shem Tov was trying to accomplish is that even the peasant can open up his eyes and point, Hine Elokeinu Zeh. I see HaKadosh Baruch Hu with my own eyes. I see Elokus everywhere. I see that Inod Movado is just Ribbon Shlom and everything is from him, and to reach even the lower levels. So I think that aspiration that Chassidus is to bring real, deep Getlichkeit, to borrow the term from Schiller, to everyone, even the lowest Madrigas, even to the people who don't know much, who don't do much. I think there's a very, very profound truth within Chassidus, and that's why I would argue that it is possible to separate Hasidic thought and Hasidic practice, because there are going to be Jews who are not going to wear Shraimel and Bekisha. I think that they're not able to get to what the Baal Shem Tov was looking to bring, the awareness of Hashem and seeing Hine Malkeinu, here's our King, serving Hashem in every dimension. I think is not tenable. Certainly the core of Chassidus, which focuses on Pnimius, an inner dimension, not just an inner dimension of the physical world, but within each person. The inner dimension, the neshama, the kus, is much more important than the chitzonius and the externals. But if what's meant in separate Hasidic thought and Hasidic practice is just sort of the theories of Chassidus versus the bringing Ruchnius to a very tangible level, that I think is inseparable. The whole point of Chassidus is to make Ruchnius very tangible, very real. I don't think it can be separated.
When I said before that the Hasidic movement, as it has arrived in history at this point, carries with it three separate elements: the avodas of Hasidus, let's call it, and the segulas of minhagim and miraculous history, and then what I call the counter-revolutionary element, which is the rejection of modernism. I think there's no doubt that these things can be very much separated. And it is particularly, I think, the genius of, well, Breslov and maybe Chabad to an extent, that are the most open to that separation, to extract Chassidus from its cultural confines. And in fact, I found it interesting that of the sort of non-Hasidic, spiritual Hasidic movements that Rabbi Reichman listed before, that 3 or 4 of them were sort of Breslov-oriented, so that Breslov seems to still have that ability to see its spiritual package as preeminent. On the other hand, there is no doubt that a Chassidus which would be open to the philosophy and the avodah of Chassidus, while devoid of the counter-revolutionary and minhagic elements, would look very, very different than anything we've seen until now. And that's why I referenced before sort of certain religious Zionist circles in Eretz Yisrael, the so-called Chabakuk, or even in more mainstream Chadal, we get a whiff of this. And what would develop there would be something different than we've heard or seen about until this point. But if one believes, and I do believe this, that the Torah of Baal Shem is Nitzchias, then who knows exactly what the Levush is going to be that is going to extend it into future years. I just wanted to add one more just point here as far as Samarov has been mentioned twice in several contexts. I think it is important that the audience should realize that the Samarov's approach to Hasidus and to Rebbes and so forth was an aberration of the Hasidic movement, because he felt very compelled to say, because of his ideological qualms about Zionism and what he saw was a misstatement or misunderstanding of Ahavas Yisrael, he felt compelled very often in his firm to say that Hasidus is completely forgotten. Nobody knows what Baal Shem is anymore. Nobody knows what this is. It's all over. It's finished. Because he felt that there might be a distortion of the likes of the B'ditch V'Rav and Moshe Sasa and Zisha. He's more Ahavas Yisrael, the Rebbe, so to speak. He thought they could be distorted into being soft on Zionism, which to him was the ultimate philosophical failing, and therefore he tended to downplay the miraculous, the Rebbe's, the Hasidic doctrine in a way which was sort of unique to him and those who followed in his ways. Also wanted to just make one other horror, as long as we're here with Samarov, that on the Zionism question, that I don't think we can quite equate the anti-Zionism of Satmar, Tolstoy, Dushinsky, et cetera, with the non-Zionism of the 95% of the Hasidic world, which is somewhat different. It's not clear how it views the phenomenon of Zionism, whereas I say those groups which I just listed before see it as inherently evil, but they would be a tiny segment of the overall Hasidic community. Back to the original question, yes, they can be separated, and Mitzvah, God willing, they will be effectively separated in many communities.
Focusing back on the YU community, let me just make a quick note. If anybody has a burning question that they would like asked, feel free to text me. I'll give you my cell phone number, or reach out to me on social media. Give you guys ideas. But also feel free to text me, 516-404-0203. We're going to ask one more major question, then we're going to end up with a lightning round. We're going to try to do some quick takes on different parts of Chassidus. But as a larger question, focusing specifically on the YU community, how do you think Hasidic thought and practice should best be integrated in this community that we have right here? And maybe also, are there any instances where you see it being integrated which you don't think necessarily is a healthy expression for the population right here? We can start with.
I actually think that over the years, our community's gotten a lot better in this regard. Thrilled that Moshe Weinberger is now such a major part of our yeshiva, and I think in general it's a beautiful thing. I guess in terms of where it can be added is at a younger age. I think more of the high schools should be learning Chassidus. I know Frisch now has a Chassidus Chabura, it would be beautiful if SAR, Ramaz, other high schools would also be learning Chassidus. And I actually think that we're fortunate that Baruch Hashem, there's been a tremendous hikush for Avodas Hashem, for Ruchnius within our community.
I think we're past. We're past. Yes. Why do you think it's so broad and so eclectic? It's an advantage and disadvantage. Because
Sounds like you're not passing.
I'm explaining why I'm passing. So therefore, it's hard to say what the community should do. It's not going to the community. And it's Yisro Yosef Ben Avyasa. I don't think that we can describe anything which is going to be meaningful.
It's a tough question. My initial response, born of 40 years toiling in non-Orthodox high school, is let's get the basics straight first before we add the self of Chassidus. There are many days when I think that let's just straighten out basic davening and learning Shmiras Mitzvahs, and then we can add this self up.
No, I would like to add to that.
Well, I'm not.
I don't want to forget. You go to an average davening in certain yeshiva high schools of our circle, and you go to visions, you don't see on a weekday, and there's no comparison. They're right. So
That's my answer, Rabbi Bechhofer. I'm afraid to imagine what would be like the answer.
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, this is disturbing. As again, to enhance your answer a little bit or add to it, every day I travel between these three worlds. My day begins at MTA, and then I go to Bashevkin in Monsey, which is sort of a standard yeshivish place where I am in the afternoon, and evenings I'm in the Hasidic community of Monsey. And there really is no comparison in terms of basic Shmiras Torah mitzvahs. But again, as Rabbi Bechhofer said, it's such an eclectic world, it's such a diverse world, non-Orthodox. Even within MTA itself, and there's just, the student body is so different, which is why it's very difficult, as you say, to create an educational paradigm that would apply to all the many different layers and orientations of the student body in MTA, and then to apply it to other types of places like Frisch and Ramaz and SAR and so forth. So it'd be very, very difficult. But just to finish my point before. So there are days when I think, let's just get the basics straight before we worry about the flea flickers and the slam dunks. Let's run the ball off tackle and work on our layups. That's what I think when yes. But I bet of the very few people who thinks the Super Bowl is a cricket competition. On other days, though, I think on more optimistic days when the sun is shining and the constellations are aligned correctly, I think, well, maybe not. Maybe the Pnimius of Derech Hashem is such, and maybe the Lechtigkeit of Derech Hasidus is such that maybe it can serve as a stimulus to practice running the ball off tackle and so forth. So, in that sense, there are days when I think maybe we could do more, actually formally or informally teaching and discussing. My experience has been, though, and to articulate the other side of the equation, my experience has been, though, that for those who are lacking in the basics or have a certain negativity towards the basics, no matter what you do, it's going to be a very, very tough road to hoe. So my answer is on most days, I think it's better to water the ground that is already fertile, and on other days, I think maybe the Lechtigkeit is such that it can bring even the Neshamas Yeveshos can be brought to the Rosh. Different days.
Okay, before we get to the lightning round, we have a few questions that have been texted. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. I want to focus on one. Feel free to pass entirely because it is somewhat subversive. I actually found it to be a fairly fascinating question. And that is something that trend in more progressive and left-wing communities to use Chassidus to be more permissive, specifically to people who are in for issues related to egalitarian rights, to issues related to LGBT inclusion, and they will quote Hasidic ideas to maybe allow and foster a more permissive and expansive community. To those who do such, would you respond that they are separating Hasidic ideas and Hasidic thought, as we discussed earlier? Are they perverting Hasidic thought? Or maybe is there room to use Hasidic thought to such ends? I don't know if anybody would want to weigh in on that
So
question.
if I could jump in, one of the ideas I heard from China Rebbe was to describe, or to try to define the concept of Netzach versus Hod. And the Rebbe suggested that there are two models of leadership. There's one model of leadership which he called Netzach leadership, it's a Moshe Rabbeinu, Yikov Adinah Sahar. There's a certain truth. Moshe Rabbeinu says his truth. The truth is penetrating. It may be abrasive. It may be difficult. He powers forward with his truth. The other model of leadership, we'll call it the leadership of Aaron HaKohen, the Sahoid, is to be concerned that the person who has to hear the truth may not be ready to hear the truth. And so Aaron HaKohen, he smiles, he says, "You're really right, let's stick with it," and eventually to bring in the truth. And one of the things that he said, which is very powerful, is that both modes of leaders have to be in communication with each other, but especially Aaron needs a Moshe Rabbeinu. Aaron is trying to be makariv people, he's not projecting right away the harsh realities, and is giving people time to come to it. Has to always be checking with the Moshe Rabbeinu to make sure he doesn't go off. And I think that's where there's the big difference. I think it's possible to separate Hasidic thought from certain practices while being mavata oneself to a Rebbe, asking the Rebbe that these appropriate places, things to drop, not so important, less important. I think in these areas where it's subversive, there's no one, any statute who's supporting these types of efforts. That's, unfortunately, when people misuse Torah, Nasiyilimba, it becomes a Samisa instead of a Samcha.
Yeah, I think that I would agree 99.999% with Rabbi Reichman's formulation. Torah Judaism is orthodoxy, and there are certain doctrines we must believe, and there are certain practices broadly written in the Shulchan Aruch which we must obey. And to reject them is to reject the essence of Torah and the essence of our belief. However, does that mean in the practical day-to-day efforts of Kiruv that one must the very first day tell the budding Baal Tshuva, there are two shittas in the Egavas that do both, Sirugin or Ritzufin, that might not be necessary on the first day. So there can be a certain development, a prudential development to how one expresses oneself. But I think that the movements and organizations that you mentioned, and I think also of sort of the whole sort of, the Zalman Schachter types and these kind of sort of bizarre amalgamations based upon Chassidus, we have to reject them in doctrine, but they too are people, and we must reach out to them in the perversity of their errors to be mantra them in the right direction. But there can be no compromise with the essentials of Emunah and Torah mitzvahs.
If you go back to the Rizal and you talk about being Malas and Tzaitzes, you can justify just about anything. Something exceeded, or different, as has been done throughout the ages. It's a very, the Kabbalistic underpinnings of Chassidus are very dangerous. Judaism is a dangerous religion. We have many different shittas which can lead people, if abused or misused, to negative ends. And then one of my Rosh Yeshiva, and Shalom, Musar, and one day forecasting on himself to set himself on fire because he couldn't live with his Averos, which he was committed. So which he thought he was in. So there's days of religion, that makes it fun. Otherwise it'd be boring. So therefore, of course, everything which we do has to be done with a sense of Yerushalayim. Like the Moshe's Trumer to 1974, I think it was, to the woman in Boston who wanted to go down to Taoist, where Moshe said, there are Gedorim in which normative done which we add Yerushalayim to ourselves, which enhance our abundance of Hashem, and if we're not going to the normative pathways, then we have to check whether it's really motivated by Yeras Hashem. So this also is true of anything in Yadus. Everything in Yadus has to be checked. Is this part of the normal Dera, which is Mekuba Midor? Is this motivated by right motivations? Is the L'Shem Shemayim of Abba Lir involved?
Okay, so we're going to do the lightning round now. And the way I like to frame this, aside from one question lightning round, which really is you do in hopefully 1 or 2 minutes, we're just going to start from Rabbi Reichman and move rightward and leftward, and it'll be very, very quick. Each question should take just a couple of seconds. So, no longer alive, who's your favorite figure in Hasidic history? Maybe it's a
Yes, that's
What living figure in Hasidus most inspires you?
None.
What is your favorite sefer in Hasidic thought?
Anything by himself.
Varies, but on many days, Rabbi Zev letters.
Do you have a favorite vort or story? Obviously compact, within like something that you could encapsulate in a line from Chassidus.
I think the Wilson's theme that our door is the Chusim, the lowly Jews. The lowly Jews are the ones that bring Mashiach. So they're really the most special.
One line.
The Rebbe Maharash once met with her Salons at Big A, Rosh Hashanah in the resorts, and Maharash was riding in a carriage when Salons was walking, and Maharash said to him, "Come up in the carriage." And Salons said, "No, I can't." And when Maharash said, "Why? I checked the seat. There's no shackles in it." And Maharash said, Salons said, "I still can't."
As son of art at the Bashevkin came into the world to teach us Anava and Simcha. The hepech of Anava is Gaiva. The hepech of Simcha is Atzvus and Holulus. So that the hepech of Simcha is not, as we necessarily think, depression, but part of the hepech of Simcha is flippancy, the silliness.
What book would you recommend to somebody who wanted to learn more about Hasidic thought?
I would recommend my book, Flames of Faith. An introduction to Hasidic thought.
For the Avodah of Chassidus, Thomas and Talmud. For the theory of Chassidus, Sukkot and
I'm going to say the Torah's Avos, which is a Slonim Alikut, provided that before one goes to the Veta, one learns the Hakdama of the Nesiva Shalom. And if I may quickly throw in a second one, I'm going to go with Rabbi Bechhofer, this fellow Sultan also.
Okay, let's thank all of the panelists for a really wonderful discussion and evening. And for viewers who got after, you can come over and ask some questions. But I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and have a great evening.